Welcome to HOA Chronicles. Please like and subscribe the channel and press the notification button to notify for next suspenseful videos. The warm ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and freedom as she sipped her morning coffee, gazing at the waves crashing against the shore from her deck. This house wasn't just a structure. It was the dream she and her late husband had built together, brick by brick, memory by memory. But that peaceful morning shattered when she opened a letter from an unknown real estate agency. Confused, she read the words again. Final notice regarding the sale of your property. Sale. She hadn't put her home on the market. Her heart pounded as she scanned the page, looking for some mistake. The letter claimed that her oceanfront property was in escrow and that she needed to vacate soon. Panic surged through her veins. She never signed anything. She never even considered selling. So how was her home, her sanctuary, suddenly being taken from her? Her hands trembled as she dialed the number on the letter, demanding answers. A cold, indifferent voice answered, claiming they were handling her home sale through the HOA. HOA. That was impossible. Her home wasn't part of any HOA. She had deliberately purchased this house decades ago to avoid the nightmare of homeowners associations. But the agent on the phone insisted. Her home had recently been added to the HOA, and the board had authorized the sale. The rage that bubbled up inside her was only matched by the deep, sinking fear she couldn't shake. Something wasn't right. She hung up and immediately searched online, trying to understand how a home could be forced into an HOA without the owner's consent. What she found was a tangle of legal jargon, loopholes, and nightmare stories just like hers. Determined to get to the bottom of it, she marched to the real estate office. The receptionist barely looked up, handing her a file with documents she had never seen before, papers with what was supposed to be her signature. A chill ran down her spine. Someone had forged her name. The contract claimed she had agreed to join the HOA 6 months ago, giving them full authority to oversee her property, including selling it under their restructuring plan. Rage and disbelief clashed inside her, but she knew that losing control now wouldn't help her. Instead, she grabbed the papers and left, heart pounding, mind racing. Who did this? And more importantly, how could she stop it? Her first instinct was to call the police. This was fraud, theft in broad daylight. But when the officer arrived, his face was as emotionless as the real estate agent's. "Ma'am, this is a civil dispute, not a criminal case," he said, almost bored. "You'll need to take it up with a lawyer." She felt her world crack at the edges. How could the police not see this as a crime? Someone had stolen her home on paper and was about to take it in reality. But the officer simply left, leaving her alone with a growing sense of helplessness. By the time she found a lawyer, exhaustion had set in, but determination kept her upright. He listened, brows furrowed as he scanned the forged documents. When he finally looked up, his expression wasn't reassuring. "This is bad," he admitted. "These aren't just amateur forgeries. Someone knew what they were doing." That was the moment she realized. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a calculated scheme, one that had likely been perfected over time. "The problem," the lawyer continued, "is proving it. Right now these papers say you agreed. It'll take time to challenge them in court, and meanwhile the sale might go through." The ground beneath her seemed to vanish. Time. She didn't have time. With nowhere else to turn, she sought out her neighbors, hoping for advice or at the very least, some solidarity. But what she found was worse than she had imagined. One by one, people admitted they had heard rumors of similar situations. Homeowners suddenly finding their properties claimed by the HOA, pressured to sell, bullied into submission. Some had fought back and lost. Others simply gave up. A sinking realization hit her. She wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. Fear mixed with fury. If this had happened to others, how many more were at risk? And more importantly, who was behind it all? Her gut told her she couldn't win this fight alone. She needed leverage. And in today's world that meant public exposure. With no other options, she crafted an email to the local news station, detailing her story, attaching the forged documents, and even linking to similar cases she had uncovered. Within hours, a reporter called back, their voice sharp with interest. "This sounds like something big," they said. "Let's meet." Hope flickered in her chest. If she could get this story out, maybe, just maybe, she could stop the sale before it was too late. But then, something unexpected happened. A man approached her outside the courthouse, glancing over his shoulder before speaking in hushed tones. "I used to work with them," he whispered. "I have proof." She barely breathed as he pulled out a flash drive. "You weren't the first. But if you act fast, you might be the last." He refused to say more and disappeared into the crowd. With shaking hands, she plugged the drive into her laptop that night. What she saw made her blood run cold. Documents, emails, financial records, it was all there. A trail leading back to the HOA board president, the real estate agent, even a handful of city officials. It wasn't just a scam. It was an empire built on stolen homes. Armed with the evidence, she met with a reporter, who quickly realized the magnitude of the corruption. The story aired, sending shockwaves through the community. Calls flooded in, homeowners with eerily similar stories, former HOA members confirming the fraud, and even a few anonymous tips implicating higher-ups. The pressure mounted, and soon, the authorities could no longer ignore the scandal. Investigations were launched. Arrests were made. And just days before the sale of her home could be finalized, it was officially voided. The forged documents were declared fraudulent, and the HOA's illegal actions were exposed for all to see. But as the dust settled, she realized the real lesson wasn't just about stopping her own home from being stolen. It was about protecting others. She started a group for homeowners facing similar battles, offering guidance, sharing legal resources, and teaching people how to spot the warning signs of fraudulent HOAs. What had started as a personal nightmare had turned into a mission, a fight for justice that she refused to lose. And while she had nearly lost everything, she walked away with something far more valuable: the knowledge that one person, when determined enough, could stand against corruption and win. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension as she sat beside her lawyer. Her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles turned white. This was it, the moment she had fought so hard for. Across the room sat the real estate agent and the HOA president, their confidence faltering as the judge reviewed the mountain of evidence against them. Her lawyer stood, his voice steady but powerful, laying out every detail of the scam. The forged documents, the illegally added HOA membership, the countless victims before her. He painted a picture so damning that even the defendants shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The judge's face remained unreadable, but as the arguments continued, it became clear. Justice was within reach. The opposing side tried to argue technicalities, tried to twist the narrative, but the evidence was overwhelming. And then the moment came. The judge's gavel struck, and in that single sound, months of fear, anger, and exhaustion melted away. The sale was officially declared void, her home was safe, and for the first time in months, she could breathe. But more than that, this wasn't just her victory. It was a win for everyone who had been wronged. Because now, the scam was out in the open, and the people behind it could no longer hide. But just because the battle was won didn't mean the war was over. The emotional toll this had taken on her was immense. Nights of lost sleep, days filled with uncertainty, the constant fear that at any moment, everything she had built would be ripped away. She had aged in those months not just in years but in weight, carrying the burden of fighting a system designed to wear people down. And she wasn't alone. Other victims reached out to her, their voices trembling as they shared their stories, some of them too broken to fight back. That's when she realized, this wasn't just about her home anymore. It was about all of them. And if she stopped now, how many others would fall victim to the same scheme? No, she couldn't allow that. So instead of retreating into relief, she stepped forward, stronger than ever, ready to take this fight beyond her personal battle. The community began to rally, and what started as whispers of frustration turned into a collective roar for change. People who had once felt powerless were now banding together, demanding justice, exposing other cases of fraudulent HOA takeovers. A group of homeowners formed an alliance, hiring legal experts, attending city meetings, and pushing for reform. She found herself at the center of it, not by choice but by necessity. People needed guidance, and with everything she had learned, she could offer it. She began holding meetings, teaching people how to protect themselves from fraudulent HOAs, how to check public records for suspicious activity, how to challenge illegal decisions before they became irreversible. The power was shifting, no longer in the hands of corrupt HOA boards, but in the hands of the homeowners themselves. But as they fought back, those responsible for the fraud fought harder to maintain control. Threats started coming in. Anonymous letters warning her to drop the case. Rumors spread about her to discredit her credibility. Even vague legal threats meant to intimidate her into silence. For a brief moment, she wondered if it was all worth it. Was she putting herself in danger? Was she pushing too hard? But then she thought of the elderly couple down the street who had lost their home because they didn't have the resources to fight. She thought of the single mother who had been bullied out of her property, forced to start over with nothing. No, she couldn't stop now. If anything, the threats only proved that they were scared of losing the power they had abused for years. And that meant one thing: they were winning. Slowly, the walls of corruption began to crumble. State lawmakers took notice of the growing outrage, calling for new regulations to prevent homeowners from being forced into HOAs without consent. Investigations uncovered deep layers of fraud, leading to the arrests of not only the realtor and the HOA president but several other key players who had been operating under the radar for years. And as justice was served, the message was clear. Homeowners were no longer easy targets. They were fighters now, equipped with knowledge, backed by a community that refused to be silenced. But through it all, she learned the most important lesson of all. Resilience isn't just about fighting a battle. It's about knowing you deserve to win it. So many homeowners had been trained to believe they had no choice but to accept what was done to them, that they couldn't challenge authority, that they would always lose against those with power. But that wasn't true. If this experience had taught her anything, it was that standing up, speaking out, and refusing to back down was the most powerful weapon of all. She had fought not just for herself, but for her neighbors, for strangers, for people she would never even meet but who would now be protected because of what she had done. In the end, she stood on her deck once again, looking out at the ocean that had almost been stolen from her. The breeze was the same, the waves just as steady, but something inside her had changed. She was no longer just a homeowner. She was an advocate, a fighter, a voice for those who had been silenced for too long. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, she made a promise to herself. She would never let anyone take away what she had fought so hard to protect. And more importantly, she would make sure no one else ever had to fight alone.